Women's rights in Islam versus Christianity. A comparative analysis. The subject of women's rights has been a focal point of discourse in both Islam and Christianity for centuries. While both religions are monotheistic and share certain historical connections, their approaches to women's roles and rights reflect differences in theology, cultural development, and legal interpretations. 1. Women's rights in Islam. Islam's teachings on women's rights come from the Quran and the Hadith, sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, forming the basis for Islamic law, Sharia. Islam fundamentally recognizes the spiritual equality of men and women, though differences arise in their social and familial roles. This dual aspect of equality and distinction defines much of the discourse around women's rights in Islam. Spiritual equality. Islamic teachings emphasize that men and women are equal in their spiritual obligations and moral responsibilities. In the Quran, both men and women are addressed as equal before God, with similar duties to pray, fast, and give charity. Quran 33-35. Marriage and divorce. In Islamic marriage, women have the right to consent, and marriage contracts, nikah, typically include provisions for a dowry, mahr, that the husband must give to the wife. Women also have the right to seek divorce, though the process can vary based on local customs and interpretations of Islamic law. Inheritance and financial rights. Islam grants women the right to inherit property, though their share is often smaller than that of male relatives. For example, daughters inherit half the share of sons, Quran 4:11. This difference is justified by the Quran in the context of men's financial responsibilities in supporting their families. Despite these limitations, Islam was revolutionary in the 7th century in granting women any inheritance rights, which many other societies of the time denied. Education and work. Education is highly valued in Islam for both men and women. Prophet Muhammad is famously quoted as saying, "Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim." Historically, women in early Islamic societies played significant roles as scholars, poets, and traders. Modesty and public life. Islamic teachings on modesty, including the wearing of the hijab, headscarf, reflect a broader concept of moral behavior for both men and women. The extent of veiling and segregation of genders varies across cultures, but modest dress and behavior are seen as core aspects of Islamic life. 2. Women's rights in Christianity. Christian views on women's rights have evolved considerably over the past 2 millennia, shaped by interpretations of the Bible, church traditions, and changing social contexts. The role of women in Christianity has historically been defined by patriarchal norms, though contemporary Christian movements increasingly advocate for gender equality. Spiritual equality. In the New Testament, particularly in the writings of Paul, spiritual equality between men and women is emphasized. Galatians chapter 3 verse 28 is often cited. "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." This foundational belief in spiritual equality is central to Christian thought, suggesting that men and women have equal value in the eyes of God. However, the practical application of this spiritual equality has often been hindered by patriarchal interpretations of Scripture. Marriage and family. Christian teachings on marriage often emphasize the complementary roles of men and women. In many Christian traditions, men are seen as heads of the household, with women encouraged to adopt supportive roles. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 22-33. Divorce, once strictly forbidden in many Christian denominations, has become more accepted, especially in Protestantism. The Catholic Church, however, still upholds strict views on marriage as a sacrament, making divorce difficult and remarriage after divorce nearly impossible without annulment. Education and work. In Christian history, women's access to education was often limited, particularly in the Middle Ages when the Church dominated European society. However, the Protestant Reformation and other reform movements brought significant changes, with education becoming more widely available to women. In contemporary Christian societies, women have equal access to education and employment. Role in the Church. One of the most significant areas of debate in Christianity regarding women's rights is their role within the Church. In Catholicism and many Orthodox traditions, women are not permitted to become priests or hold leadership positions. However, many Protestant denominations have embraced the ordination of women as ministers, pastors, and bishops. 3. Comparative insights. While both Islam and Christianity advocate for the spiritual equality of men and women, the social, legal, and familial rights they prescribe differ significantly, influenced by the historical and cultural contexts in which these religions developed. Spiritual equality. Both religions stress the spiritual equality of men and women before God. However, in practice, the degree to which women's spiritual status translates into social or legal rights varies greatly depending on cultural contexts and denominational differences. Marriage and divorce. In Islam, marriage is seen as a contract with specific rights and responsibilities for both partners, whereas in Christianity, it is often viewed as a sacred union with a strong emphasis on the husband's authority in more traditional interpretations. Divorce is more accessible in Islam, though both religions have conservative factions that view it negatively. Public and religious life. Christianity has seen significant shifts, particularly in Protestant denominations, where women now serve as pastors and leaders. In contrast, women's leadership in Islam is generally restricted in formal religious settings, though some Muslim women hold influential roles in public life. Legal rights. Islam gives women distinct legal rights, such as inheritance and the right to own property. Christianity, on the other hand, has seen more egalitarian legal reforms over time, largely driven by secular legal developments rather than religious ones. Conclusion. The comparison between women's rights in Islam and Christianity reveals both similarities in their foundational spiritual principles and differences in their social applications. Both religions grapple with the balance between tradition and modernity, with contemporary movements within both Islam and Christianity seeking to expand women's rights and challenge patriarchal norms. While religious texts offer guidance, the interpretation and implementation of these teachings vary widely, leading to diverse experiences for women within both faiths. As societal attitudes toward gender equality continue to evolve, so too does the discourse on women's rights within these two world religions. The role of women in Islam versus Christianity. The role of women in Islam and Christianity has been shaped by religious doctrines, cultural practices, and historical evolution. While both religions share some core values regarding the spiritual equality of men and women, they differ in how these principles are applied in family, society, and leadership roles. Let's explore these roles in the context of religious texts, historical developments, and modern interpretations one by one. 1. The role of women in Islam. Sacred texts and core teachings. Islam's sacred text, the Quran, emphasizes spiritual equality, stating that men and women are created from a single soul, Quran 4:1, with equal accountability before God. While men and women are equal in their faith and moral responsibilities, Islam assigns distinct societal roles. Men are seen as protectors and maintainers of women, responsible for providing for the family, which influences rules like inheritance, Quran 4:11, and decision-making authority in certain areas like divorce. Women's rights in Islam. Islam granted women rights long before many other societies, including the rights to own property, seek education, and retain their earnings. The Quran condemns forced marriage and upholds women's consent in marital decisions. Early Islamic women played active roles in society, business, and even politics. However, cultural interpretations have sometimes restricted women's roles, creating a gap between Islamic teachings and societal practices. The evolution of women's roles in modern Islam. In recent decades, Islamic feminists have worked to reinterpret the Quran and Hadith, arguing that patriarchal interpretations have led to inequality. These reformers seek to balance religious principles with modern demands for gender equality in education, employment, and public life. 2. The role of women in Christianity. Sacred texts and core teachings. Christianity also teaches that men and women are spiritually equal, both created in the image of God, Genesis chapter 1 verse 27. Jesus Christ's treatment of women in the Gospels was progressive for its time. He included women among his followers and allowed them to participate in his ministry. However, traditional Christian teachings, particularly from Paul's epistles, have often reinforced male authority in marriage and church, with verses instructing women to be submissive to their husbands, Ephesians chapter 5 verse 22, and silent in church, 1 Corinthians chapter 14 verse 34-35. Women's rights in Christianity. Historically, women's roles in the church were limited, especially in leadership positions. For centuries, women were excluded from the clergy in most Christian denominations. However, women played essential roles in Christian life, particularly through monastic orders, missionary work, and social services. Figures such as Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint Catherine of Siena were influential spiritual leaders in their time. The evolution of women's roles in modern Christianity. The 20th century saw significant changes, especially among Protestant denominations, where women were ordained as ministers, pastors, and bishops. Christian feminists have challenged traditional interpretations of the Bible, advocating for gender equality in all areas of life. However, more conservative denominations, such as the Roman Catholic Church, continue to reserve the priesthood for men, emphasizing motherhood and family as central to women's roles. 3. Comparison of women's roles in Islam and Christianity. Both Islam and Christianity offer spiritual equality but assign distinct roles in family and society. Islam emphasizes complementarity between men and women, particularly in familial and financial responsibilities, with men seen as primary providers. Christianity has historically placed men in leadership roles, particularly within the church and household, though modern movements within some Christian denominations have embraced gender equality in leadership. In both religions, cultural practices have often shaped the application of religious teachings, sometimes leading to restrictions on women's rights. However, reform movements within both faiths are challenging these interpretations, seeking to align religious principles with modern ideals of gender equality. Conclusion. The roles of women in Islam and Christianity are complex and have been shaped by both religious texts and cultural influences. Both religions advocate for spiritual equality but have traditionally imposed distinct roles in family and leadership. In modern times, reform movements in both Islam and Christianity are reinterpreting religious teachings to promote gender equality. As these movements continue, women in both religions are playing increasingly active roles in religious, educational, and societal spheres, striving for a balance between faith and modern gender norms. Can Muslims and Christians marry? Exploring interfaith marriage rules. Interfaith marriages, particularly between Muslims and Christians, are a complex and multifaceted issue involving religious doctrines, cultural perspectives, and legal considerations. Both Islam and Christianity have distinct guidelines regarding marriage, which often influence whether and how adherents of these faiths can enter into interfaith unions. Exploring these rules provides insight into how each religion values marital unity, religious continuity, and the sanctity of shared beliefs. 1. Islamic perspective on interfaith marriage. In Islam, marriage is not only a social contract but also a religious covenant with spiritual dimensions. The primary purpose of marriage is to create a stable family structure and uphold Islamic values, including the faith of future generations. Islamic law, or Sharia, has specific rules regarding whom a Muslim may marry. Generally, Islam permits Muslim men to marry people of the book, which refers to women who are Christian or Jewish. This allowance is based on the premise that Christians and Jews share a belief in one God and have revealed scriptures. However, this permission is conditioned upon the Muslim man's commitment to preserving his faith and ensuring his children are raised as Muslims. Furthermore, Islamic law does not permit Muslim women to marry non-Muslim men, regardless of whether they are Christian, Jewish, or from another faith tradition. This restriction stems from concerns that a non-Muslim husband might influence his Muslim wife's religious beliefs and the faith of their children, potentially compromising Islamic teachings. Thus, Islamic rules on interfaith marriage are largely motivated by the desire to safeguard religious identity and foster a family environment aligned with Islamic principles. In many Muslim-majority countries, laws reflect these religious guidelines, either explicitly prohibiting or restricting marriages between Muslim women and non-Muslim men. In countries where Islamic law is the basis for family law, marriages between Muslim women and non-Muslim men are not legally recognized, while marriages between Muslim men and Christian or Jewish women are generally allowed. 2. Christian perspective on interfaith marriage. Christianity has a more diverse approach to interfaith marriage due to denominational variations. Generally, the New Testament advises Christians to marry, in the Lord, a guideline seen in verses like 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 14, which warns against being unequally yoked with unbelievers. Historically, this verse has been interpreted by many Christian communities as cautioning Christians to marry other Christians to maintain a unified faith within the family. However, there is no explicit prohibition against interfaith marriages in the Bible, and the interpretation of this verse varies widely. The Roman Catholic Church, for instance, permits interfaith marriages under certain conditions. A Catholic who wishes to marry a non-Christian or a non-Catholic Christian must seek permission from their local bishop. The Catholic party must also commit to raising their children in the Catholic faith, although they are not required to convert their spouse. Other Christian denominations, such as some Protestant churches, may not have formal restrictions but still encourage couples to share a common faith for spiritual harmony within the family. Orthodox Christianity, on the other hand, generally discourages interfaith marriages more strictly. Orthodox Christians are encouraged to marry other Orthodox Christians, and in some cases, interfaith marriages may only be conducted with the blessing of the Church if certain conditions are met, such as a commitment to raising children in the Orthodox faith. 3. Challenges and practical considerations in Muslim Christian marriages. Muslim Christian marriages often face unique challenges, especially in balancing religious practices, values, and expectations. One of the primary considerations is religious upbringing of children, as each faith places importance on passing down its beliefs to future generations. For instance, Islam requires that children in interfaith marriages be raised as Muslims, while Catholicism and other branches of Christianity may encourage raising children within the Christian faith. This discrepancy can lead to conflicts within the family, as spouses may have different perspectives on religious rituals, holidays, and beliefs, potentially creating tension or confusion for children. Couples must also navigate cultural differences, as Islamic and Christian traditions around family roles, gender expectations, and family involvement can differ substantially. In some cases, interfaith couples may choose to compromise or alternate religious practices, but they may face opposition from extended family members or religious authorities. Social acceptance is another issue, as interfaith couples may encounter resistance or disapproval from their faith communities, particularly in regions where religious homogeneity is expected or where interfaith marriages are discouraged. 4. Legal status and recognition of interfaith marriages. The legal recognition of interfaith marriages between Muslims and Christians varies globally, often depending on local laws and the degree to which religious doctrine influences legislation. In secular states, interfaith marriages are typically permitted and recognized by law, though some legal systems may impose specific requirements for documentation or officiation to ensure both parties are aware of their rights and obligations. In contrast, many Muslim-majority countries implement restrictions or conditions for interfaith marriages, particularly for Muslim women. In countries such as Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, interfaith marriages between Muslim women and non-Muslim men are not legally recognized. However, in some countries, such as Turkey or Lebanon, civil marriage is available, allowing couples to marry outside religious constraints. In such cases, couples may marry in a civil ceremony, though their marriage might not receive full religious recognition. Conclusion: interfaith marriages between Muslims and Christians present both opportunities and challenges, allowing couples to bridge cultural and religious divides while requiring careful consideration of religious obligations and family expectations. While Islamic and Christian doctrines approach interfaith marriage from distinct perspectives, both aim to maintain the integrity of faith within the family. For Muslim men, marrying a Christian woman is often permitted with conditions, while Muslim women face greater restrictions, reflecting the broader aim in Islam to preserve religious identity. Christian denominations vary in their approaches but generally encourage shared faith as an ideal for marital harmony. As globalization and multicultural societies increase, Muslim-Christian interfaith marriages continue to grow, requiring ongoing dialogue and understanding. Couples choosing this path may need to navigate religious, legal, and social challenges, but they also serve as examples of how love and respect can foster unity across diverse beliefs.